We stand on the outer once again, numb, disillusioned, silenced in pain.
Slander to the ground, the earth crumbles at our feet.
We pray the earth swallows us before we show defeat. We are the forgotten ones, the black sheep of the black sheep, the outcast of the outcast, yet our passions run wild and keep learning, no excuses will suffice. A daring glimpse throughout the crowd, sweet sparks come to sight.
With caution in our hearts, something pulls us to unite.
The unseen shackles are shattered from our sight. Forgotten ones, the black sheep of the black sheep, the outcast of the outcast, yet our passions still run forgotten ones, the black sheep of the black sheep, the outcast of the outcast, yet our passions still run deep. For we are the forgotten ones, the black sheep of the black sheep, the outcast of the outcast, yet our passions still run deep.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Mantra Moments. Tonight we have the very well-known and respected Ed Gilbert, and he'll be speaking about soft law and their new little podcast they've got, the Three Little Pigs. Little piggies or the little pigs. I've forgotten which one it is. Okay, I'm going to just bring Ed on and he's going to... There you are. Hi, Ed. How are you going?
I'm good, Donna. How are you going, darling? Thanks for having me on. Fantastic.
Thank
Wonderful.
you for coming on. So, freedom, Place of Freedom, is it? Is that what it's called?
Police for Freedom. What a journey. I mean, we all remember those days back when
Yes.
COVID kicked off, and Police for Freedom, where have they gone and what happened there? Well, what was I doing? First of all, was the first thing. I mean, the whole thing about Police for Freedom was to try and liaise and work out the rules of engagement of what was happening at the time between the police and the different, issue-motivated groups that had grievances. Because, as ex-police and as a guy who was in the Irish Police, I could see that there was no liaison to establish what was the rules of engagement at the time of the protests. And I contacted the police down here to say, well, who do I contact if I wanted to march with 10,000 people down Belgrave at the time? And they said, oh, well, we'd have to, we don't know. Hang on, I'll pass you on. They passed me on to Baroni, then they passed me back to Knox, and then they passed me back to Baroni again. And I said, look, I was in the job once upon a time. I know you have to have an office somewhere. And then they put me through to the press office, and the press office told me that they had actually discontinued the liaison during the time of the COVID stuff. And I thought this was incredible that you had all of these genuine people that had grievances and fears and confusion. And the people that were supposed to be, looking after their interests, namely the police, were not
Yes.
communicating with them. And, just leaving this horde of upset people and just to, the cameras coming in and the images that were being taken, it was just a horrendous situation. So, I was standing in the middle just trying to de-escalate that tension, which was obviously building from a narrative in the background. There was terrible fear at the time, there was all this stuff, the police, they're all Freemasons, they're all communists, they're an army of this, they're an army of that, they're coming to get us. And I knew that that wasn't the case, but I knew there was definitely manipulation taking place somewhere. It's definitely a poor culture that needed to be addressed. There was extremely poor performances and serious incidents with the police, and we're all aware of the various incidents, that were well documented. But,
Yes.
all of these things didn't serve us any good in society. And so it needed to be looked at, needed to be dealt. And so that's effectively what Police for Freedom was about. But at the time, it was also to set up a localized connection with the lower rank police at a local level. Because when we're looking at these incidents, when, particularly government stuff, when it's going on, big protest events, and they're sending in, hundreds of police into these operations, they're going in to do overtime, these guys, for the day, right? They've already accepted the direction. They're going in to do their job for the day, and they're going to do it. And they're operating under direction. But if you're talking to the local police, they'll be able to operate differently to the guys that are just on a direction in this big frontline environment. So I was trying to advocate for people to connect with the local police at the time, to build that network. But there was so much anti-police sentiment, and I don't blame the people, right? And it was warranted, right? But we lost connection with the whole concept of the police are us. We have a fountain of justice, and we dispatch people from our community. They just happen to be dressed in a uniform, to keep law and order. But effectively what we had law and disorder.
Yes.
And I was going, how is this happening? How is this happening? And trying to understand it. And, I ended up getting fined myself from going through the court process and everything else at one of the protests. And I was trying to go through that protest, trying to learn, understand, well, what is taking place here? And it brings us into that soft law stuff. But we'll get into that in a little bit.
Yes.
But getting back to Police for Freedom. Look, there was a couple of different police groups involved at the time. There was Cops for Truth, which was established by Alex Cooney. I think you remember him. He was one of the first guys that came out with his letters. And there was a discussion about, why do we need to have two police groups, or two groups that are acting individually, separately, because it kind of creates confusion. So I was happy to step down to Police for Freedom, and just, it was more of an international thing as well. We had an international network of police in different countries, reflecting on what was happening in their spaces. So, you still have the group there, Cops for Truth, and now you have PAC's team have established there. That's the 220 ex-police from Victoria Police. So, so that's where Police for Freedom went. And then I've just been operating on my own bat, doing my own thing, again, just trying to unveil what is taking place here. Because, like I say, I've got two boys. I want them to have a fair game, a fair go in life, right? And it's our responsibility to take what we've learned, our learned experience, and be humble enough to sit in circle and listen to each other and to say, okay, well, how are we being impacted? What's causing these impacts? What can we do about it? And how can we turn the ship around? But, but to get there, we have to have a structured sort of an approach. And that's what I'm trying to do at the moment with the activities that I'm engaged in at the moment and the different groups.
Which is?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. So the different groups. So, I joined up with there was an ex-police guy, Mick White, from New South Wales, and he established a group called Bellator Fortitudinum, which is a support group for post-traumatic stress. And a big issue is moral injury, is this new thing that seems to crop up. More people are suffering from moral injury than post-traumatic stress. And Krista Hawk was the psychologist who was also the founding member of that group. And this moral injury stuff is a big issue. But again, this comes back down to this soft law we'll talk about later on. There's so many people in society, in different jobs. And it's not just the police, it's many, many jobs. Have you ever heard people say, I didn't come here to do this? Right? Or I'm not getting paid to do this. Right? That thing. And when you hear that, that's when people are being asked to do things that are actually impeding on people's rights. And that doesn't sit well with people's moral compass. So there's two ways you can deal with that. You can go into an internal battle with yourself and battling with the organization that you're working with, or else you just shut down and just head down, keep going, be the grey man, and not even think about it, not deal with it. And society is also in that space where we have people just, who haven't been impacted, in some
Yeah.
way, or people who've been privileged, got privileged, they got extra money, they got payouts, whatever. They tend to, turn away from the homeless. They turn away from the problems. And it's amazing. It's like the aggrieved over the last number of years are treated like homeless people on the streets in the city. When you see people walking past, they don't even look at them. It makes them uncomfortable. They want to look at the phone. They want to look away. They want to
Yeah.
walk the opposite side of the street. And it's the same with people who are sharing and airing their grievances over the last number of years. Some people don't want to think about it. So it's a case of,
Absolutely.
yeah. So my thing is, and this brings us into the groups then as well, is we start at the bottom. So what we do is forget all the noise, forget all the alarmism, forget all the division, forget all this moral hazard of having to pick a side and all this kind of stuff, right? Forget about all of that. And let's just start looking at each other and saying, okay, who's being damaged? Right? Who's being damaged? Who's being hurt? Let's start from a place of heart. And when we start from a place of heart, we go and talk to the people who've been damaged. And then we can say, well, why have you been damaged? Why have you been impacted like this? What caused this? And as we peel back through the layers, we say, okay, well, there was a policy contributed to this. Okay, well, what policy was it? Right? And as we look at the policies, then we come across thousands of these soft laws that are coming in every day of the week. And this is what's causing the disorder that we have across jurisdictions, you know? And if you recall, I think it was maybe last year or 2 years ago, there was a guy,
Yes. Right.
he was supposed to have been a judge in the courts over in California. I think Snopes got onto it. It turned out he was a judicial officer, but nonetheless he was on the ball with this one. But he uh, he wrote a letter in 1954 when he was studying law in college about the textbook that he had, and it was given steps on how to break down a democracy, right? And he published that letter, and of course, the fact checkers jumped onto it. Couldn't deny the letter. They questioned his integrity as a judge, but his points were correct, right? So I'll read out the 9 points to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the first one is divide the nation philosophically, okay? Foment racial strife, cause a distrust of police authority, swarm the nation's borders indiscriminately and unconstitutionally, engender the military strength to weaken it, overburden citizens with unfair taxation, right? We're on to 7, encourage civil rioting and discourage accountability for the damages and the hurts, control the balloting and control the media. Now, if you look at those 9 steps to break down a democracy, where are we now? Right, we can see all of these things have rolled out over the last number and are rolling now. And I'm actually worried that I think the democracy is gone,
Yes.
right? Because this has all been done. All of these points have been done. And, if you look at these different elements, and this is why we spoke about this earlier on, right?
That
Where,
T-shirt.
where, where is the middle ground? Or for me, the middle ground comes from reason. It's just to apply reason, right? Come with a genuine concern. Okay, we want to do no harm, we want to cause no loss, and we want to apply our reason and have reasonable, non-belligerent conversations about why these things are happening, right? The powers that be seem to want us in what they call issue-motivated groups, right? You're not issue-motivated groups. You're hurting. You're grieving. We're grieving in all these different ways for different things. And if we're associated with that in any groups that are contributing to any of these 9 elements, right? We're actually contributing to the problem ourselves. So for me, it's my thing is if we all come from a place of compassion and start at the beginning. So I'm liaising with groups like JRN Community Housing is one, fabulous work he's doing in the community. He does gets young lads that are affected by drugs in, gets them onto rehab, gets them into a sober living environment, and then gets them back out to work. He's out there feeding the homeless. He's out there giving them sleeping bags, and he's doing this off his own bat. So he's coming from a place of heart. The Blue Coffee Organisation, talking to them last night, same thing, coming from a place of heart.
What do
Um,
they do? What do they do?
Yeah, so they want to take what JRN are doing and bring it over to East Gippsland. They run a coffee run and they go around the homeless giving them coffees and just that side of things. There was also a woman from Centrelink there last night who comes
Okay.
down and gives her time to try and help people who are having difficulty with the Centrelink process.
Mm, I
With
love
your
that.
for but she'll help, right? There was another gentleman there last night who's trying to set up a group for parents who are being abused by their adult children. And, some of them are not so adults that are, on drug affected, right? And, this is rampant. Now, he was an elderly gentleman and he had two sons that were drug affected and he's been living with this abuse for, 25, 30 years.
Oh,
So he's setting a group up to support the parents. Um, so much fabulous work going on in the community. But again, all of these different groups, of course, we mentioned Puddle Jumpers there. You meant the Carers Project. There's another one, right? We
yes.
have the Pub Whisperer, John O'Hart, So all of these points of outreach are, yeah,
Can you
yeah,
tell that story? What the
yeah.
that one is?
What the Pub Whisperer is, the idea of it. Yeah. So there's the gentleman by the name of John O'Hart. He done this YouTube series of 100 great Australian pubs. And whilst he was on his journey, he came to the conclusion, and being in the catering or the catering space himself as well, a lot of people in that space end up dealing with the trauma of, people that have come into the pub and haven't been feeling great, and then they're not seeing afterwards, and then they're left with the whole thing. But if I had realised, I could have said something or I could have done something, that kind of thing. So to fill that space, he came up with this idea of a group of pub whisperers. Right, so people that will be on standby, available on call to assist with bar staff, hotel owners. If somebody comes in and they show the signs that they may be, at the end of their tether, right? So they had this idea of, well, we could have this the empty glass, the campaign. So you have this empty glass, and he's got coasters with bodies that can assist and provide assistance and help. And that's on the coaster. And his idea was that if you're feeling down, you could sit with the glass, put the coaster on it. Bar staff would call somebody and come down and give you some assistance. And I thought, this is absolutely fabulous, beautiful work. So I've connected him with the guy, Rex, who runs the Oak Tree down here in the basin, over my way, and also the 12 bar up there in Belgrave. So sitting down with those guys next Wednesday with the view of getting the Pub Whisperer going down here. And that's something I think that can expand. Now, there's another side to this. I spoke to the lads and I said, I love this idea, right? But, a lot of guys aren't going to sit in the pub with the glass in front of them because, guys, we're tough, we're stoic, you know what I mean? We don't want to be
Yes.
seen to be, you know. But what it does give us the opportunity then is to sit in the pub or maybe have conversations about, well, what's going on that's leading people to that empty glass, and what can we do so that we don't get to the empty glass? I love that proactive element, right? Let's take proactive steps and say, okay, well, why are people getting to the empty glass, right? And what can we do to help and assist? So we have this concept. I'll be putting it to all of these different groups together collectively to have outreach points at each of their operations. And what we can do is we can take almost like a call taking operation, take incidents of how people have been impacted and create an incident so we can work on it collectively to see, okay, well, what are we going to do about this? What can we do about this? Why is this happening? We have a couple of people lined up to be inquirers, right, to go and inquire, to check out. And this will be using AI as well, right? Is there quasi legislation involved in this? This is talking about the soft law stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Was it processed properly? Because it's not a term of art, it's not enforceable by law. So now we need to start talking about the people who are being asked to enforce it, right? And this is the And so it gives us that intelligence to actually start to act on it and start to turn the ship around. Because our ignorance of this is what's allowing vested interests and agenda to force its hand upon us. And so we need to learn. So I think the best way to learn is to actually physically see the impacts and to be able to associate the impacts of a policy with real data coming from the field. So yeah, that's all taking place. We've got a site going, the Voice of the People, which is just under construction. Again, this is going to be finished collectively between everybody, the stakeholders, so everybody agrees on it, and so it should be open source. So we should be able to see what's happening in each of the communities and share the knowledge then of what we're finding talking to different teams, right? So it's a constructive approach to dealing with it. So let's go back to the soft law. What is this soft law stuff I keep talking about?
Yes. What is
Yes.
this law?
Okay. All right. So I spoke to you the other day on the phone about this, and I totally get that I confused the life out of you because I was confused getting off the phone, and I'm conscious of that, right? So I've been yeah,
Sorry.
it's okay. But I've been trying to I've been trying to get my head away around an easy way of describing this. So look, let me put it to you this way. We all are supposed to have a fountain of justice. Okay, that's from where our law comes from. Now, most countries there's a constitution. That's your fountain of justice. That's where it's supposed to come from. Okay. Then that's the law. Now, then we have the order. So the order is the statutes that are made based upon the laws, but they have to be lawful, so they're not going to impact your rights. All right. And they're your statutes, right? Now, I know in the Australian context, the statutes were written in conjunction with the Statutory Publication Act of 1903, right? So they would have been statutes that are weighted against your constitution. Okay. But all of that changed when the Lima Agreement came in, right? All of that changed. So you see, the problem with hard law, which is the Constitution, is pretty rigid. And if you want to change it, you got to go to the people and you have to have a referendum, all that kind of stuff. And it's kind of arduous if you're a fast moving business. So they came up with this process of bringing in these soft laws. So what is a soft law? So what they've done is they've set up or given power to the administrations. This is where the corporate stuff comes in, right? So they're set up as a corporation and they've given them authority to issue subordinate legislation, is what it's called, or quasi legislation, right? Now, the word quasi is not a term of art. What is a term of art? A term of art is a word that exists in law. So the word quasi doesn't even exist in law. It's openly not enforceable by law, but they're used to influence your behavior. Okay? So it's kind of a threatening stick finger point. If you don't do this, this is what's going to happen. Right. And because it's in a corporate services based environment that they have this set up in, if you don't do what you're told, we're going to take your license. If you don't do what you're told, you're going to get a fine. You're going to get this, you're going to get that, you're going to get the other. Right. But again, it's not enforceable by law. So it's being enforced using the police and using these different elements of the institutions as their enforcement arm, which they shouldn't be. Right. Now, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the cases going on in court. I was in court myself and looking at the other cases that were going through court. And, we spoke previously about the way other people dealt with their fines was these work development programs and everything else, right? And none of it has been lawfully, enforced. None of it in the courts. It's all being kicked to touch. It's almost like this WDP thing is like a way of just whitewashing, bad money. That's what it feels like. It's just dodgy. Who even came up with this? It's just dodgy. The whole thing is dodgy. Yeah. But where do these soft laws come from? They come from basically commercial law, lex mercatoria, right? Now, here's the thing why I had to really start digging in and reading about this, because when you guys signed up to the Lima agreements, right, part of that was Unidroit. Okay. You hear people talking about Unidroit. What is Unidroit? Unidroit have a statute. It's like an agreement between all signatory members, and Australia is one. I think it was 1975 or so they signed up. But Australia is one. Now, under the Unidroit statute, if you go to Article 2, if anyone is listening, if they want to look this up, look it up yourselves online. I won't do it for you, but it's just look up the Unidroit statute. Article 2, Section 3 says that your government has to do what they're told, pretty much, right? And then section 4 says that any of his agents, whilst they're doing their business, will have immunity pretty much afforded to them. So my first question is, well, if the government is being told what they have to do and they have to accommodate it, what are they accommodating? And then the next question is, well, under section 4, if they're being told they're being given immunity, what are they doing that they need immunity for?
Mm-hmm.
So that made me ask a question, right? So let's park that there. Viewers, go do your homework, have a look at that document yourself. It's freely available online, right? So looking at COVID kicked in, and all of the COVID regulations were all soft law regulations. Okay, so they were outside of hard law, they were soft law regulations. So I was looking at this soft law stuff and this quasi legislation stuff. And so effectively, what they're doing is the administrations are able to run off law, or they're not laws, I'm going to stop saying that, these instruments, run off instrument after instrument after instrument after instrument without any consultation, without any deliberation, without being checked properly, and yet using the arms of the state to enforce it upon its people. That loose, right? And it's become so proliferated and obfuscated that and they haven't been repealed in any low laws, that it's almost impossible to deal with, right? So we've got to look, no one's talking about this, but we've got to talk about it, and we've got to open the conversation with our police. And I'm not talking about a senior management who's getting paid a hell of a lot of money and should be having these conversations instead of me sitting here trying to have this conversation. They're hiding away in an office somewhere and not having the conversation. So it's up to the community. So for me, it's okay, let's dive into the community. Let's go to the heart of the community. Let's actually care. Let's go down like Peter's doing. He's down the train station. The homeless are coming up to him. Everyone who's homeless has a story, right? How did you end up in this situation? Okay. And then when we give that empathy, we listen to the story, then we can work together and we can peel this back. Now, the thing about this, and we won't get too much into, because people get lost getting into law and legal and all the rest of it, right? But under the Unit Rights Statute, as a signatory, their default position in dealing with things in the courts is lex mercatoria, which is contract law, commercial law. So when people are talking about the colour of law, grey letter law, that's what it is. It's this lex mercatoria, and it's a presumed position unless you state the jurisdiction that you want your matter heard in. So when people were stating and questioning the jurisdiction during the COVID fines and all that, they were dismissing the cases, as I did. Right? Case dismissed, case dismissed, case dismissed. Why? Because we can pick the jurisdiction then. So they don't want to go down that road. No, kick him to touch, get him out there. Right. And they're maintaining this kind of, and it's not secrecy, it's open. They'll tell you, they'll tell you it's civil, this is a civil matter. It's, so why are we in court here if it's a civil matter, right? This is the, why have we got what are effectively criminal matters being dealt with in the magistrates' courts? Because they've turned them into quasi-legislative instruments. Oh, we got a knife problem. Let's issue a quasi-legislative instrument. Oh, now we've got a knife ban. All right. Oh, now we've got this. Now we've got this. But what we don't have is we don't have proper administrative law. So, looking up into all of this, I discovered another crowd called the Australian Institute of Administrative Law. So this was a group of judges and barristers and all this that were voicing big concerns about this soft law stuff coming in, because it's moving away from law and order to hoping you're going to have order because everything is being checked properly. And now we're seeing the impacts of this looseness, this what it's allowed to happen. So I looked into this, and there was a number of documents I did get. I contacted their representative, the Victorian representative, Dr. Jeffrey Barnes in La Trobe University. And he was still listed as the Victorian rep, but he had stood down, interestingly enough, before COVID. And he sent me a reference to check out, which was called Soft Law and Public Authorities, Remedies and Reform, which is an ebook. I bought that. Going through that, it's fascinating. But there's one online that everybody should have a look at. And just again, look it up yourselves online. I'll just say it out here slowly. Parliamentary Scrutiny of Quasi-Legislation. Look it up yourselves. Parliamentary Scrutiny of Quasi-Legislation. And have a look at that. And in a particular, there's a section in it called Rule of Law or Law of Rules. And have a look at that. Right now, this is again the journey of discovery. We discover these things. Right. So our problem here is that we've stepped away from law, that we have all of these soft laws being issued that are not enforceable by law, okay, and but are based upon consent. So the power is actually with us because we don't have to consent. But yet the police are going, oh, but I've got to do my job. No, no. Hang on.
Mm.
Let's look at what's being revealed on public record because this is all being called conspiracy. This is not conspiracy. This is a very reasonable following inquiry, line of inquiry that we're looking at here based upon what's being disclosed, not what we're presuming or asserting, right? So if you look at the Three Little Pig show that I'm involved with Kim on the hands-on experience, you know, we've got 20, 22 or 23 episodes done there now, but we've gone right back. You know, we've been interviewing Heidi Ward when she was taking private prosecutions against the police up on Whitsunday Islands to, you know, see what her experience was.
Mhm.
And you know, from Heidi all the way through, we've been interviewing different parties, trying to work this out, peeling it back layer by layer by layer, story by story, you know. And yeah, the question is at this point, you know, I was speaking to Johnny Q earlier on about this exact thing. We need to stop speaking from a place of belligerence, right? And just start with acknowledgement. Okay, we've got a problem. This is what we know. We want to have a non-belligerent conversation on how to fix this because you're part of our community the same as we are. Society wants us in boxes, and it wants us in boxes so we don't speak, so that we don't communicate. Yeah, it wants us in a box of religion. It wants us in a box or under a particular flag, or it wants us here. It wants us there. And this is the problem that we have. If we stay in those boxes, we polarize. And I think that's what's happening in the freedom movement now, right? But you know, when we saw Epic, right? When I was up there in Epic as well, you know, the big one up in Canberra, and that was a horde of heart, right? For me, that was the will of the people. It was the sentiment. It was this vibration. You could see this, but it
Yeah.
was not, you know what I mean? And it was an energy that needed to pull together, you know, in a constructive, actionable way afterwards. Okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going. But the question is, what is that? What are we going to do? Do you know what I mean? Okay, yeah, we get the government to stand down. If we stand them down, right? Who's taking their place? We got, what's our plan? Have we got a plan? Is there a
Mm.
plan? Right? But that plan only stems from need, right? So we got to start with, hang on, what are the impacts? Right? What's happening on the ground, right? And so for me, it begins at the bottom because I think, you know, we mentioned those 9 steps to break down a democracy. I think they've succeeded. They're already done,
Yeah.
right? And
Yes.
so now, now what we have is in Victoria, we seem to have this shift towards this treaty thing and the voice stuff. So it looks like it's just another corporate model, you know, shifting over into another corporate model, and you know, blame the other guys on the actions of that corporate model,
Yeah.
right? But still, no one's talking about the soft law, the little cards that they're using under the tables all the time, right? When what we actually need to do is agree on, hang on, fellas, what fountain of justice are we starting from here, right? So where does the indigenous lads here on the ground meet with the other fellas? You know, the people that are dependent on the Constitution. Well, they come from a place of hurt, and we come from a place of hurt. So that's where we begin, and that's the unity right there. That's the
Yeah.
fountain of justice. The fountain of justice comes from our heart, and it's written on a piece of paper that, call it whatever you like. It's the Constitution, but that's where we walk with that intention, and we fix the paperwork along the way, whatever needs to be fixed. But we begin with that intention. That's what I'm all about. Yeah. So yeah, many conversations, and you know, it'll come together once these groups come together and they start getting the information from the streets and from people who have been impacted. We start looking at policies, then we can get teams to start calling into the councillors' offices, start having the conversations. Do you know about this? Do you know about this stuff? Are you partaking in it? Can we desist in this? What are we going to do about it? Let's talk to the Ratepayers Association. That guy, Graham Jolly, he's fantastic. He's in a question time. Consider this. Bass Coast have 30,000 uh, ratepayers down there. And they
30,000.
have, yeah, down on Bass Coast. And I think they have question time at council. Every month
Right.
they have their question time. And there's always about, 3, 4 questions were going in last year and the previous years. That shows the level of disconnection between, and
Mm-hmm.
I understand the arguments, right? Because the councils aren't lawful. Okay. But they're running your local community, right? So they're there, they're doing it every day of the week. Yeah, they might be unlawful, but they're administering the local, community. So we're going to pretend they're not there because they're doing this every day of the week. So the less people that engage, the more of these little soft laws can be pushed through. It doesn't need a referendum. It doesn't need to have all this parliamentary scrutiny. They can do them overnight, right? And that's what this Agenda 30 stuff is all being done through, is soft laws. Local little soft laws, bylaws, all the rest of it. And we're all going around shouting about the impacts of the soft laws and trying to find remedy in law when they're not operating in law. They're operating in lex mercatoria. They're operating in an offer and acceptance. So we're accepting all of this. But the question is how do you express that, non-consent in an effective way?
Yes, that was going to be my next question.
Correct. And that begins with conversation. So you don't wait for the incident to happen and then deal with this clash at the interface. Right? We start now with the conversations. Right? So, for example, if the police are dealing with a quasi-legislative instrument, okay, like an AVO, for example, an AVO, and an AVO is a civil matter. So basically, it's a service that they're offering you, right? When they come up and they issue the AVO on face value. Now, you don't have to accept the AVO, right?
Right.
You don't have to consent to it, right? Now, if the police at that point think that somebody's genuinely in danger in the house, they can step into rule of law and they can deal with things effectively going down that road, right? But because resources are the way they are, there's this great kind of box ticking environment. Cover your arse, right? So there's an AVO issue just in case on face value, right? While they consider it and they sit and consider our charge is going to be done and all the rest of them, is an offence being disclosed here? But what can happen is people are separated from their families during that period, waiting on the process because it's delayed for weeks and months and all the rest of it. And it's impacting the kids and it impacts the dads and it impacts the mum, the whole thing, right? Now, of course, there's situations where intervention is required immediately and investigation and proper allocation of resources to investigate it immediately. Absolutely, we recognise that, but not in all cases. Now, here's the thing for the police, because they're operating in commerce, well, if you don't consent to it and you don't enter joinder with them, you're not engaging in the commercial side of it, you haven't done anything wrong, and they effect an arrest on you. Well, now they're not operating as police, they're operating as contractors, right? And they're not enforcing the law, they're actually pushing something on you. So now they're actually personally liable. In the private, they can be privately prosecuted. So there has been actions against police who've overstepped the mark in the commercial space, by acting outside of the box and people taking private prosecutions. But again, there's not much said about it. It's like, let's not open this can of worms, right? So that's the conversation. And that's a conversation I believe that we have the opportunity to have now. And it's a conversation I was trying to have years ago, was to get the legal team of the police to sit down and let's have a real conversation here. But we couldn't get past the perception that they were all communists and they were an army of this to come in and get us. No, our institutions have been under attack with these 9 steps for a number of years, right? So, the institutions won't defend themselves. We have to defend the institutions, but we need to defend the institutions to be the institutions we want to serve us. So the conversations need to begin with the police side of things is, okay, this is not good for you guys. This is not good for the community, but here's a pathway to actually resolve and to turn it around. And that's using the learned experience that we have and using the tools that we have now as well. Like AI, the whole legal industry has all moved into AI because AI is a task machine. So it can write reports at a rate of knots quicker than we can. So, I mean, we can use AI the same. We can use AI then to analyze all of these different, matters, these different injuries, impacts that are coming in. And we can turn around policy to fix this. I mean, if the soft law stuff is coming through unchecked, we can easily turn that around to have it checked. The tools are all there. It's just we've become disconnected away from it. Yeah.
how do we? Oh, hang on. There's someone that wants to ask a question.
Yeah,
Valerie, did Ed gain all this knowledge in the UK? I'm 70 years old and was never taught anything of this stuff.
there you go. No, I actually worked that stuff out over here in the last 4 years, just based upon what occurring with COVID. Over in the UK, I done some had some communications with Mark Sexton.
Mhm.
If you're in the UK, you would have been following the work of Mark Sexton. And again, coming back on soft law, what Mark Sexton discovered through discovery was there was an Operation Tala, Tala was the name of the operation. And that was where the chiefs of police over in England had issued a direction not to take complaints in relating to COVID matters, right?
Really?
Yeah. Yes, yeah. And that's Operation Tala. Mark Sexton disclosed that. So I wonder was the same things going on here. Now, here's the thing. We don't need a lack of transparency with regard to this kind of stuff. We need transparency. It's only reasonable. What are you hiding here? Why are they bringing in these? Clearly there's vested interests. And the question we have to, it's like a state of emergency that forces us to ask this question. So how did these guys get away with it? Well, the only reason they got away with it was because we stepped away from administrative law into a soft law environment. You're able to step away from duty of care, right, into this other space, which takes away all of that, right? And so this is why we have to say, okay, this has been happening over the last number of years. We do have organizations that are concerned about this. There are people within the institutions that are concerned about this. We need to connect with these people. Ireland signed up to UNIDROIT in 1940, right? So, we've had funny business going on in Ireland for years and years and years. Different countries at different stages have got into this soft law stuff. But yeah, but the COVID business over the last number of years, it really, really tweaked my interest. In particular, what's really interesting, if you look up Unidroid, if you look up soft laws and COVID and Unidroid, put that into a search engine, it'll bring it up for you. But effectively, what they had was if you had multinational companies and they had losses incurred because of an act of God, all right, and they had listed COVID as being an act of God. Now we know COVID was not an act of God, right?
Yes.
But if you were a big multinational company and you had lost millions in your projections because of this act of God, well, then you would be compensated by the government, right? So these guys had worked out a way of milking our future generations to cover their losses for something that seems they got involved in creating. And how would they get away with that? Oh, they got away with that because all our checks and balances are gone out the window. Well, why are they gone out the window? Because they're operating in soft law. Well, who allowed them to do that? Well, you signed up to it in 1975. Did you not notice? This is how cheeky it is. And it reminds me of Ireland at the time of the 2008 global financial crash. And we had the president of the European Central Bank contact our finance minister at 2 minutes to midnight to tell him that if he didn't guarantee, the hole in the bank's balance sheets, uh, guarantee the banks that this was his words, a financial bomb would go off in Dublin the following morning. Said that to our finance minister. The finance minister went to a fella called David McWilliams, who was an economist. And he said, what do we do? He said, guarantee the banks. He said, are you going to be in the dark ages tomorrow? So he came in, he guaranteed the banks. And a couple of months later, there was recorded tapes released of the bankers, right? And having discussions, secret conversations on the phone, talking about where they got the size of the hole in the balance sheet from. Now, it started at 6 billion. And it ended up, as they kept finding little bits here and there, it ended up, I think, at 60 something billion, right? This hole in their balance sheet that we guaranteed, right? And you got to release these tapes, and they were laughing. They were sniggering, right? And the other guy says, where did you get the figure from? And your man laughed, and he said, I pulled it out of my arse. That's what he said.
Oh,
Now, these are guys that are laughing at the
yes.
misfortunes of us. Right. And these guys that are in there that are pushing this soft law stuff outside of administrative law are laughing at us here now. So I think we have a duty to pay attention to this, to pull up this process because, we're all in a state of alarm and, we're all in a state of too many rocks on our back and everything else. But all of that is symptomatic of us moving into this space, this quasi smoke and mirrors, dodgy space that they're able to operate in. And, we're in an environment where they just keep throwing out, uh, you know, divisive strategies to make sure that we don't have this conversation. And so for me, I think the counter thing is, well, how do we turn the ship around? Well, if
Yeah.
they're dividing the nation philosophically, well, then we need to sit down and have that philosophical conversation. Right? Let's not be divided. We need to have that conversation. If they're fomenting racial strife, we need to de-escalate racial strife. Right? If they're causing a distrust of police authority, we need to get back to the foundations of what policing actually is and begin again, if that's the case. And that begins in the community. Because, if you consider policing is always the Irish police and Garda Síochána were founded at a time of civil war. And they were an unarmed police force. And the reason they were unarmed, so they wouldn't be seen as being an oppressive force, that they're actually there by the consent of the people. Right? If they were standing there with guns, they were a target. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what effectively we need to get back to, in that level of community again. And that's why I say connecting with our local police is different to try and remedy something with a guy at a protest in a big line and he's there for overtime. It's not the place to have the conversation. We need to be proactive and stop waiting for the event to happen. Do you know what I mean? We're always waiting for the next big one, the next big protest. So what's the objective? What's going to happen? Right. So let's say there's one proposed there for the 31st of August.
Oh, yeah.
So what comes out of that then? What work are we going to do to de-escalate, to deal with this soft law stuff? How do we turn that ship around? And I'm not saying to people don't go on the 31st. I mean, if that's your thing, go and do your thing. Support everybody doing their thing. But
Yeah.
we need to look at things differently and be effective and say, okay, well, what is actually causing the problem, and how can we effectively deal with that? What learned experience have we got within our ranks in the community? How can we pull together and try and, it sounds weird, but actually defend our institutions from the bottom up? Because if we don't defend our institutions and they won't defend themselves and work towards fixing them, right, across the board together, you're going to have somebody else running the country for you, which
I
is
just
already
don't understand how we're going to do that. I just don't understand how we're going to change that around.
It's going to have to be a long. It's a process. It's a process of engagement. It's a process of, we can see the impacts now of failed policy. We can see the impacts. Nobody wants these impacts. The police don't want these impacts. We don't want the crime levels that we have. We don't want the problems that we're seeing. Right. So let's turn around and actually say, okay, well, let's see what we can do here. Well, if it's policies based upon offer and consent, I'd be calling down to police, say, okay, well, any matters that are being dealt with that are quasi-legislative in nature, we're not consenting to them. Right. And have people that are confident enough to take it the whole way in court and to go the whole way. Teams, get in there, because court is the battleground, with this lex mercatorial stuff, this commercial stuff. So it comes down to an understanding, a learning. And there's another important thing I want to say. The thing about those groups that I mentioned earlier on, they're operating outside of the mandatory environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you've got situations there where there's another organisation that I heard the other day on the radio that I want to connect with, is Beyond Survival, the Beyond Survival project, right? And they've been looking at the amount of negative incomes that have came when police were dispatched to domestic incidents, for example. They've made things worse, right? So what they're actually doing is they're suggesting that the police step away from dealing with those quasi-legislative instruments in family law, and that we have local people trained up, like elders or peers, or groups that can come in and assist, so that you don't have that knee-jerk mandatory reporting environment, where you're breaking up families and everything else, that we can de-escalate things without that, straight away it's in with the official push. So if we're going to be operating based upon consent, it's conversation, and it's conversation with the guys in the local stations, because they're dealing with the impacts on the front line. We've got a vast amount of members in the front line are taking their lives. The numbers are huge. because of moral injury, because of the rocks that are on their back, because of a failing system, a system that's failing,
Yeah.
right? And it's failing our people. So that's the battle. That's the battle line. Is right at the bottom, helping each other in that regard and having the conversations.
Mm.
But if we polarize into groups that are not having those conversations, we're not going anywhere. We're becoming a stagnation as against the movement.
Yeah. So you speak about this on Three Little Pigs.
Oh, the three little
I
pigs.
keep
Yeah,
wanting to say Three Little Piggies, but it's Three Little
that's
Pigs,
cool.
isn't it?
Yeah,
And
three
what's
little
that?
pigs.
We've only got 5 more minutes. So where do we find that? Where do we
Oh, you
find?
actually so that was the hands-on experience on Rumble and Spotify.
Yeah.
So that was Kim Hanton's podcast. Well, it is Kim Hanton's podcast. The hands-on experience on Rumble, and then the Three Little Pigs was a segment, but now it's actually just kind of become the Three Little Pigs every week. So it's myself, Nick White, he's ex New South Wales, and then Kim Hanton, he's ex South Australian Police. He ran for federal. So yeah.
And you speak all about this?
Oh yes, yeah. People go in there, have a look, go back through the shows we've done. We had Daryl Dixon on there as well with Daryl O'Brien. Again, Heidi Ward, the stuff they were going through. We've had most of the people from the movement. We had yeah, we've had a Freemason on it. We've had that was an interesting one. Pulled him on to have a conversation with him to understand what that side of it is about. So what we're trying to do is talk to everybody, because we need to talk to everybody. Hear
Yeah.
everyone's side of the story, right? Again, come back to the circle, come around the table. Let's hear your story. What's your story, and how do we fix this together?
Yeah.
If we're going to dig the sword in the ground and not talk, well, then we're part of the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yes.
So
Wow.
so where does it go? I mean, it gets to a point of forcing the hand. There's no forcing the hand. It comes down to consent. We just have to get our head around. We're consenting to this, right? And if we have one man goes in and he tries to defend himself in the course about it, and they make an example out of him. Well, then most people just keep and toe the line. So what we need to do is we need to be relentless with the courts,
Yeah.
right? But I was speaking to Johnny Q earlier on about this. I was talking about the findings that we get from the village. If we can feed that into his network, the Self-Representative Litigants Association, so we can look at how to deal with this. And again, so we're not just one individual. We're a collective now, and we're
Yeah.
learning like a hive of ants, right? And yes, some of us may fail and fall, but that's a learning as well. That's okay. Let's look at everything that's happened over the last couple of years, right? Let's look at where we've been misdirected. Let's look at the mistakes that we've made, our failures, and let's draw a baseline in the sand. But once we can see what the problem is, then we can work together to get there, right? So it seems to be this facilitation in the background is the problem, as against, here comes the dark side is coming in to get us all. Is the dark side tools are there, and they just gave it to us, and it's just sitting there. We can use it, but we choose to go for comfort and ignorance and just don't want to look at the hard stuff.
Yeah. Yes. All
But
right.
that's
So
what.
we've got someone here, Dan. I've contacted Ed to discuss what we can do. So that's
Beautiful.
good.
That's right.
And hopefully you'll get more people doing that, because I think that's what we need to do too. Sounds great. So we do have to go now, Ed. I thank you so much for coming on, and so much information.
Yeah, I don't know. It confused myself. But listen, thanks for giving me the time, Don, and thanks for having the
Pleasure.
conversation.
Thank you
Yeah,
for all the work you do too. Thank you.
that's no
Okay.
problem. All
You
good.
take care. All right. Have a great week.
Yes.
Okay.
Talk soon.
Okay. See you, Ed.
All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Go away. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Have a great week. And I'm sorry it didn't get to Rumble. I did notice that someone was saying it wasn't on Rumble, so I apologise for that. Have a great week, and I hope you enjoyed the show.
Whispers rise like smoke in the air. Everyone's talking, but nobody dares. Lost in confusion, but who